My name is Dustin Kelly, but everybody calls me DJ. I'm prior Army, serving as both a Ford observer and a military police officer. I've spent the last 14 and a half years as a police officer and detective in a large metropolitan police department. Two things that I've learned throughout my career. One, everybody has a story to tell. And two, the best stories are true. This is the DTD Podcast. In 3, 2, 1, and we're live. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the DTD Podcast. This week in the studio, a man who joined the United States Marine Corps on the Delayed Entry Program in 1997. He has spent time with the 1st Fleet Anti-Terrorism Security Team, 5th Marines, the USMC Marine Augmentation Training Support Unit, and the 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion. During his time with the Marines, he has been a Scout Sniper Instructor, Chief Scout, and Liaison and Chief Instructor for the FBI HRT Sniper course. This guest has also worked with contracting companies like BlackWater and even worked with the CIA for 12 years. He has deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, Israel, and Bahrain. He is currently the co-owner of Nomadic Research, an outdoor company that values patriotism, individual responsibility, and the love of freedom of the great outdoors. My guest is also the founder and owner of 102250 Inc., which provides tactical and security-based consulting to the U.S. government, DoD, and law enforcement. I'm so happy and honored that this guest has chosen to tell his story on my show. Please welcome my next guest in the studio, Dagan Hoot Van Oosten. How are you, sir?
Hey, thanks for having me, bro. I'm fantastic.
I am so glad you're here, man. We've been building this up for a while. We've been talking back and forth, and I couldn't be happier that you're here.
Me too. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, so we have a lot to talk about. You have said before when you were talking to me that you're the king of the 12-year career, and you do things for about 12 years, jump ship, start something else, and get it going. But everything that you have done seems to just go crazy, you know, whether it be your career in the military and the fast promotions that you got, whether it be working in the contracting or with the CIA or with the companies that you're running right now that seem to be taking off. So let's get started like we always do. You have a giant military family. Let's go back to the very beginning and talk about what brought you into this life.
Yeah. To your point, lots of USMC and military in the Van Oosten family lineage. I just kind of grew up around it, and my father kind of is the one that introduced me to it. All the uncles, you know, the grandfathers, the great uncles, so on and so forth, and it was just always part of my upbringing. And so, from a very, very very young age, there just wasn't really a question. I always kind of knew what I was going to do, you know, and as far as I was concerned, it was, you know, join the Marine Corps. There was, you know, no question.
With your family, is there anything in the history that you know of, any particular wars that stick out, or was it mostly peacetime? How was it growing up?
So yeah, mostly peacetime. Obviously, all of the my dad, you know, did a few tours in Vietnam. One of my uncles was right behind him. He was in the Army. He always says, you know, I was the only smart one. I joined the Army because everybody else, you know, I joined the Marine Corps for the most part. And all peacetime, obviously, when I was growing up, because they were all Vietnam era or just shortly after Vietnam, unless you go to the great uncle side, you know, and all the great grandfather and all the way back, you know, towards the beginning. And then you've got like my great uncle Paul, who did Iwo Jima and all the islands and so on and so forth. And, you know, there was, you know, Hank, Harvey, Paul, and then Marvin. And they kind of fell into, as much as I know the history, they kind of felt my dad's dad fell into kind of the Private Ryan deal where somebody had to stay back and you know, do the farming. But all the other great uncles, you know, went all the way back to my great grandfather. And I think we've got, if I count them up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, you know, 14 military service members majority Marine. There's 2 Navy, 1 Army as I look at the photos here. But yeah, so a scattered amount of, a fair amount of combat to peacetime. So a little bit of everything.
With a lineage that strong, does that put pressure on you before you join?
To be honest with you, not really. It felt very, very comfortable. I could see where somebody would look at that and say there is pressure. I mean, I think there was the pressure to do well. Obviously be the best if you put that on a spectrum. But I always just felt like that was the path. There wasn't, nobody ever put any pressure on me to go because I think they knew there wasn't any talking me out of it. You know what I mean? I was putting all the pressure on myself, if that makes sense.
Well, you joined with the delayed entry, which is what I did. I think it was a little different for you because I did a little bit of National Guard time while I was in high school. Is there anything you do while you're waiting to go in, or was it just kind of a pause and wait?
So I had come from a very, very small town. My graduating class was like 68 people. Kind of given the family lineage, I think the recruiter, and I had a fantastic recruiter. I think he knew he had a pretty long leash with me, so to speak. So he was very, very proactive because he knew how anxious I was to go. A lot of rappelling, a lot of PT on the weekends. He'd show up to class, to the high school and pull me out of class, towards the end so we could go do whatever it was that he wanted to do that day. And everybody kind of went along with it because once again, with a real small town and a real small high school, nobody was going to say no, So I was kind of I was as proactive as you could be in the delayed entry program. I never said no to anything and had a good time. I was just, I couldn't wait to go.
So as you go in, do you have your thoughts that you chose before you go? Like, did you know what you wanted to do? Because a lot of guys I've heard on the show come on and they say, well, I go to them and I told them I wanted to be infantry, but I wanted certain things. And they say just the honor of being a Marine is enough for what you're going to get. Same with you, or did you kind of have your path good? Because you said you had a good recruiter. So was it pretty much cleared out of the way for you?
100%. Yeah. He actually talked to me and I went in and I said, I pointed at the recon poster and said, I want to be a recon Marine. I want to be a sniper. He was the one that kind of said, well, have you ever heard of Fast Company or have you ever heard of Security Forces? And of course, and I hadn't at the time. So he gave me a couple I'll date myself, some VHS tapes to watch and a couple leatherneck magazines, that featured Fast Company for Fleet Anti-Terrorism Security Teams, or as we used to joke, fake ass SEAL teams. I can say that I was there, and so he kind of talked me into that. He's like, hey, this is a good segue into what you're trying to do. You have to be an infantryman. You have to be an 0311 or an 03XX to be in security forces. And he kind of sold me on that. And so that was my first, luckily, that was my first duty station was at First Fast in Norfolk. And it's one of the best kept secrets, I think, for a young Marine. And so I was very, very fortunate to spend a good 2 years there. And I think it really set me up for success going into the fleet and then doing the other kind of checking the boxes that I ended up checking. So yeah, to your question, he kind of talked me into my first unit, which was Fast Company.
As you get to this Fleet Anti-Terrorism unit, you go directly to Bahrain, right?
It wasn't, yeah, we weren't there for too long. My memory doesn't serve me fantastically, but a handful of months, maybe 4, give or take, before we were on our first deployment over to Bahrain. Yeah, it wasn't 2 and it wasn't 6. It was pretty quickly after we checked in.
Well, and it's pretty quick after you come in. Like, you're done with boot camp, you go to this unit and then you go, but you're already chosen as a team leader. Is that correct?
I didn't do my first deployment there as a team leader. There was, and that unit is kind of run by corporals. And, I don't want to say you barely saw the sergeants. The sergeants were the squad leaders. But it was corporals were gods, sergeants were untouchable, and the platoon sergeant and obviously platoon commander were what they were. But you're talking 40-man platoons. And so the, Lance Corporal and above was kind of the meat and potatoes of it, and primarily Lance Corporals. So I did that first deployment as a team member and then was, quickly a team leader as soon as we got back.
Okay, now meritorious promotions, though, we have to talk about those because you received 2 of those in this unit, which is, in all my experience, that's pretty unheard of, especially 98 timeframe. We're not really in the global war on terror. We're still kind of in peacetime because I was stationed in Hawaii at this time and there wasn't really much going on in the world. With you going back and forth to the Middle East, was there something that gave you kind of an upper hand for those 2 meritorious promotions?
Well, one of them was a board, and the way Fast Company works is there's 7 platoons and they're all on rotation, and it wasn't, and we were on our own little kind of island in Norfolk Naval Base, kind of separated from the rest of the larger base itself, if you will. And so you might have 2 platoons on deck at any given time. One platoon's on leave. There's a couple other platoons that are out and about, and the fact that it's a 40-man platoon at best on a 2-year, possibly 3-year rotation, I think the advantage I had was the numbers, and they need corporals obviously to carry on the platoon because, and obviously I only did 1 deployment there, OCONUS, and 1 deployment CONUS. They have boards because they need to have, corporals to run the platoons. And so, like I said, I don't think I stood out necessarily. I think I just stood out when the board came around, if that makes sense. And that was my second one. My first one was out of boot camp for squad leader guide. They give out X amount in boot camp, and I always had a leadership position while we were in boot camp. So I walked away, out of boot camp with 1 and got 1 at Fast Company shortly thereafter. I guess I can memorize things well.
Okay. Well, I mean, however you get it done is the great way to do it. With the meritorious promotions, you also are getting schools. So designated marksmanship school you go to with FAST. Now, is that kind of pushing you towards the sniper end goal, or is this just a school that you're trying to do to kind of bump up the numbers?
No, it was 100% something that I was kind of groomed or counseled by the senior members. There was 1 member of our platoon that was an 8541 who had been to the division sniper school. And then everybody else, because we fell under security forces, would go to the abbreviated DM school. So it was like, hey, you want to be a sniper? You got to go through this one first, And so I jumped at the chance and had a blast while we were going through it. I took to it very well. Yeah, that kind of gave me the taste, and then I knew immediately once I got to the fleet that that's something that I was going to pursue.
Let's talk about that for a minute, because you and I have talked back and forth on text and on the phone about the sniper role. What was it that was so amazing to you about taking up that position? Because 1, it is a coveted position that people do want, but it takes a very special person to run those kind of missions. What was it that so much called you to that?
Well, I think it was kind of the art of it and the discipline and the fact that it was held in such high regard. That's kind of that initial carrot. Like it's something special, or it's looked at as a specialized job. And so that, of course, was, intriguing. And then moreover, it was the attrition rate, and not everybody passes, and so on and so forth. And, I think that's the carrot that gets everybody at first, like, let's see if I can make it. And then once I understood the job and actually did, make it and graduate, I know I'm skipping ahead of DM school, it was the level of responsibility placed on me as a team leader or team member in either a 2 or a 4-man team that you just, in my opinion, and I'm not downplaying the responsibility that any member of the armed services has in any capacity. It was, the leash was very, very long. And that is what kind of drew me to that particular profession. Like, you're going to entrust in me to gather and collect critical pieces of intelligence, or information for intelligence purposes, and then also have that lethal capacity if necessary. And it's just me and my partner, or me and 3 other teammates. That was a lot of responsibility on a young man's shoulders. And that's kind of what I enjoyed the most about the job.
I'm glad you mentioned that. That's a lot of pressure for a young guy. That seems to be too much pressure for a lot of guys because you're given so much lead on that rope that you talked about that a lot of guys, you can either run with it or you can choke yourself with the rope. What is it that you think makes these guys, including yourself, go down the right path with it, with having that much responsibility being young? Is it something inside them? Is it something on the outside that's doing it? What makes them be able to handle so much responsibility at once?
Well, and again, not to pat myself or anybody on the back, but I think what you'll find in those sniper platoons, reconnaissance platoons, any of the Air Fingers quote specialized units is there's a kind of a higher level of intelligence, in one way, shape, or form, and then you match that with a drive and a yearning to not be micromanaged and or to be able to think freely and make decisions on your own. Sometimes you make the right ones, sometimes you make the wrong ones. And I'm here to say it. I made a I'm probably 50-50. I definitely made a lot of mistakes. But as we all do. But I think that across the board, at least in my experience, was a high desire to be independent. And with that came a higher level of intellect in some cases. Some guys were just machines that could carry weight, and some guys were a good mix of both. And I think it's such a lonesome profession that is romanticized, but when you actually do the job is very, very difficult. I think what was universal across the board was the guys kind of enjoyed the suck a little bit. Like, that was almost the reward for having that additional, like, you're getting that additional responsibility. We're expecting you to perform well. There's a lot hanging on you. And oh, by the way, it's going to be as hard, if not harder in some cases, than anything else that's going on or any other job you can pursue. And I always took particular pride in that. Like, I'm volunteering to do something that most people don't want to do, for what that's worth.
Well, but you just said, where you're not patting yourself on the back. But when you think about it in those terms, like you just said, that it's going to suck more than a lot of people do. Don't you think that a little bit of self-acknowledgement, or however you want to say it, is due?
Yeah, I mean, silent professionals, right? And that gets thrown around a lot. And that's something that, we definitely, when we're in our own little circles and, the beer and the bourbon is flowing, we're definitely, patting each other on the back. But it's definitely not something that most guys walk around chest out, head up. It's like, it's more, let my actions speak, let my mission effectiveness speak, and I'd rather just kind of fade into the background and get the handshakes and get the pat on the backs from the people and not the masses, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Snipers are very, very misunderstood in some cases. It's a very strange profession. And I saw, all sides of it, so to speak. And, some of it's good, some of it's bad. And, sometimes it's thankless. Sometimes it's the best job you could ever have on the planet.
Yeah, and we'll get into more of the 50-50 with you because I told you I wanted to talk about an article that you were featured in. As you go on to your next unit, you go to 5th Marines. That's from 2000 to 2003. You attend Scout Sniper basic course, but you take this would be your third deployment, right? 2 to Bahrain, so this would be your third, and you're going to Iraq on this one, correct?
The third deployment was a UDP to Okinawa.
Okay.
So your standard 31st MU over to Okinawa, and then floating around Australia, Iwo Jima. Half the platoon went to Guam. Your standard MU deployment. That was before Iraq.
Okay, but same unit, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So when you're doing this, when you're floating around, when you're doing the MU, are you getting exactly what you wanted out of the military? Because we're still talking 2000. We haven't hit 2001 yet. You have been to a lot of stuff that you wanted to go to, the schools and things like that. But are you getting out of the military what you kind of romanticized about it before you went in?
Oh, 100%. And if there was ever a guy that drank the Kool-Aid, I was I was funneling that Kool-Aid. I was ecstatic to be on ship. Well, that was probably short-lived. I was ecstatic to float around and to train with the other countries, and I had fantastic leadership. I had fantastic team leaders, team members. We had a really really solid platoon. Little bit of renegade, but I think that's just natural with the with the stay guys. And so the short answer to your question is yes. Went to Australia and did a bunch of training with their reconnaissance and SAS units, and yeah, I had an absolute blast on that deployment.
Okay, so as you go into Iraq, let's get ready for this deployment with this unit. Are you Chief Scout yet as you go into Iraq?
Yes.
Okay, so being Chief Scout as you go into this is even more of that, what we talked about, on your shoulders, where you're going in and, quite frankly, you've been in 3 to 4 years. Is that about right?
Right.
Yeah. So you got about 3 to 4 years in. I'm figuring you're a corporal or a sergeant at the time.
Yep. I was a sergeant.
Okay. E5, you're probably what, 23, 22, 23 years old?
Yep.
Yeah. So a ton of pressure going into Iraq. What are your thoughts before you go into this operation, before you go into this deployment? And then let's talk about a little in the middle of the deployment and then at the end of the deployment, because now you're actually seeing what a Marine was born for.
It's a fantastic question. And I think because we, kind of obviously somewhat of an emotional roller coaster, there's always that inherent fear of the unknown. What's it going to be like? The platoon sergeant at the time had a tour in Somalia, and I think a tour in the Gulf. I'm pretty sure he was a veteran of both, and so you would seek his guidance, obviously, and sometimes that was very straightforward and forthcoming. And obviously I sought my dad's guidance on the leave block prior to going, which when you break it down or look back on it, no truer words could be said. My dad said, "Hey, just keep your head on a swivel, trust your gut and stay away from stupid people. They'll get you killed," and, I was like, that's what 3 tours in Vietnam gives you right there. I was like I said, no truer words could be said. But going into it, there was a lot of angst and waiting because we had, whether it was 3 weeks or 6 weeks, man, like I said, time is such a blur. We sat waiting for quite some time, and the angst got overcome with boredom. And then it was like, hey, let's just go. I don't even care what happens. Let's just get across the line and get this thing started. Of course, once we did cross the line, it was just a day-to-day, minute-to-minute, hour by hour. It was a constant because of the pace at which we were moving. It was kind of a constant for a sniper team leader, sniper team as a whole. It was almost too fast for us to get ourselves in the fight, if that makes sense. Like everybody was trying to get their Marine Corps on any chance they got in any way, shape, or form, and that was definitely happening. But it all just depended on where you're at, what was happening, and if you were proactive enough to kind of employ yourself. And during, kind of, I want to say towards the middle of the push to Baghdad, I can remember being very disheartened because I didn't feel like I was being employed to the best of my abilities, and that was simply because there wasn't enough time to push out RNS elements, or we were just moving too fast, right? And that was, looking back, I can totally understand the commander's intent and why decisions were made the way they were made, but I can still remember the feeling as if it were yesterday. Like, I feel like I'm being held down. I feel like I'm not being able to do my job, and it was we had to wait till we got to Baghdad, for us to really kind of go to work. All things
can I interrupt you for a minute?
Yeah, of course.
I just want to ask, before you get into Baghdad, you said, I understand why they planned the way they did. Do you think it was because they were looking at this as another Desert Storm, that we were going to roll in, knock it out, be done, and get back out? Is that why they planned it this way? Or was there a different urgency on the ground than what we saw during Desert Storm?
I think, and obviously not having been part of Desert Storm, and probably not as astute of a student of history as I should be, I can just remember hearing from all ranks, above mine, which was, sergeant team leader, that the main goal is to get to Baghdad. Like, we're not sitting around, we're not waiting for a fight. We're just going to push through. If anybody wants to pick a fight, we'll handle it. And, the main objective is just to attack and secure a foothold in Baghdad. And, to me at the time, I guess that made sense, to me, like, Roger that. Okay. That's where we're going to base our operations out of. But there was always a little part of me that was skeptical because we pushed so fast that I couldn't help but think, and this isn't hindsight being 2020, I couldn't help but think, aren't we supposed to, and this is going to sound ridiculous, but I remember thinking, everybody that we're kind of driving past as fast as we can drive past them, shoot, no shoot, we're going to end up fighting them in Baghdad, or we're going to end up fighting them at some point, but that's why I was an E5, and there was 1 stars and 2 stars and 3 stars that were, making those decisions. And I got to say, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, like I said, the officer corps of 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, almost across the board was fantastic. They were phenomenal. They were phenomenal officers. They were phenomenal leaders. And I, like any enlisted guy, have my fair share of, voodoo dolls, with brass on their collar over in the corner. But almost none of them came from 1-5, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely did. Now, once you get to Baghdad, do you start to feel a little better? Do you see this actually unfolding what you wanted to unfold now?
100%, because once we getting into Baghdad was a little bit of a shit show, to say the least. It was the first time that I hadn't been exposed either on top of a cat vehicle or on foot, and on foot was very periodic. But I was locked. My team was locked inside of a track, and so for the entire push into Baghdad, we were inside of a track, an Amtrak, and the one thing I can remember was kind of the reports of the resistance we were going to get. So, be prepared for a fight. And then I told my guys, which there was 3 of them besides myself, I said, hey, we're going to get in with the 81s. They're itching for it because they're 81s. Save your ammo. 1 guy from the team up above the track at a time. Don't fire at anything that you're not sure you can, hit or engage. In other words, just dump ammo. It's not an ammo dump X. And because we don't know what we're going to hit once we get to the palace, the presidential palace, which was our main objective. So we kind of took turns. It was, like I said, it was a shit show going in there. And then once we got to the palace, we found the highest ground we could find. And then, just due to the absolute chaos of the city, we were able to employ ourselves effectively, for quite some time. And yeah, that, like you said, to your point, that's when okay, now we're doing what we're supposed to be doing.
Do you feel better about your job then? Because I have a feeling when you get a little disheartened, it's hard to kind of see the end result. Now you're seeing it. And then this was the attack and seizure of the Amal Palace, I think is how you say it.
Yeah, I can't even say it right to this day.
Yeah, I think it's the Amal Palace, but it's the presidential palace. Central Baghdad, so you're right in the middle of the shitstorm. And we've already said that this is what you're supposed to be doing. But do you ever think on this point, like, man, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life? Does that ever hit you, or are you just trying to go day to day?
I think a little bit of both. It was so chaotic for the first couple of days that you were just kind of in autopilot, because it was a target-rich environment. There was a lot going on. There, Third ID was across the river from us. So it's kind of it's definitely kind of a 360, 720 environment, and you didn't have a lot of time to sit back and kind of smoke a cigarette and go, man, this is crazy. We were just going to work constantly. And how do I want to answer that? I always felt, and this isn't me trying to sound like a tough guy, that's the last thing I want to sound like. I always felt like I was right where I should be all the time, the entire time. But once we got to Baghdad, I was like, okay, everything has led up to this. all the training, all the everything, all the, all the, the cliche things that people say. And this is it. That was a flash thought. And then targets started appearing, and like I said, and we started going to work. And so it wasn't until after Baghdad had kind of calmed down where you have that kind of cool down period, and many, King Sumers or whatever they were, the cigarettes that were all over the place, many smokes later, you're like, oh man, that was bananas, that was crazy. I can't believe we just did that. Like, I wonder what's next.
There's two questions that come up when you talk about this, and this goes back. We're going to kind of rewind a little bit before you go over there. You talk to your dad, 3 tours in Vietnam. He really knows what he's talking about. This is what he saw over there. But when you look around the Marine Corps, I can't help but to think, other than guys that were, like you said, maybe in Somalia, maybe in Desert Storm, which there were some, but there weren't a ton. Who do you look to in the Marines to tell you this is how you approach war? This is how you approach combat? Because quite frankly, you're probably going in there with a lot of guys who have never seen it.
We were 100%. And I don't know if it was because of my position as chief scout, where you're kind of trying to, obviously not kind of, you're trying to lead by example. You're trying not to show, fear or hesitation, or, it's just going to be what it's going to be. And obviously the sniper platoon is super morose, and, the dark humor that's ever present in the military, I think takes an even darker shade in the sniper platoon, because guys, are either preconditioned, obviously, just by the nature of their job, or just the thought of what it is that we're about to go do. I can remember my platoon sergeant pulling me outside, of the hut, the hooch, the tents that we had, and he's like, "Hey, I just want you to know that let the guys know if they need to talk to the chaplain, at any time, either before we go or while we're going, we'll do the best, to make that happen." He goes, "It's just going to depend on how fast we move." And I kind of looked at him and I said, "Talk to the chaplain about what?" And he's like, "Well, these guys, nobody here has ever done the job before." I go, and whether I was right, wrong at the time, or just, peacocking, I looked at him and I was like, "Staff Sergeant," I go, I think you're going to have to, turn these guys off. I think these guys are just, going to go crazy, go to town, obviously within the rules of engagement. I think your worry is ill-founded. And to my knowledge, it was. Nobody hesitated. Nobody did obviously anything they weren't supposed to, but it wasn't as big of an issue as I think some people thought it was going to be. Looking back on it now with a little bit more maturity under my belt, I'm glad that he offered that, and of course I told the guys, but if anybody went, they did it without me knowing about it. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I think that brings up another point with you saying that. The first time you do it, we don't need to talk about the mission, operational security, anything like that. But the first time this happens, the first time that you have to squeeze the trigger, what are you feeling? I got to understand that, because I told you before this is what builds the person that you are today. So I've got to understand that very first mission where you are mission successful.
Yeah, so the first time I had a live target, it's kind of a funny story. We got, or I think it's funny, we got up to the top of what I could only describe as like a very, whether it was 6 stories or 4 stories, it was big. It was shaped like a minaret, but it was a circular bathhouse. There was just, showers and tubs on all floors of this, structure in the middle of the presidential palace. And that's where we took roost, if you will. And as soon as we got up to the top of it, my team fanned out. It was, it was me and 3 other guys. And I said, and there's 2 snipers and 2 spotters. One of them is a radio operator. The other one's got a saw. And I was like, "Hey, you guys, we're going to set up right here." I go, "I'm going to go across the roof, and I'm going to see what's across the Tigris. I just want to get a good 360, because Baghdad proper, is in front of us. And then we got the Tigris and the rest of Baghdad behind us." So I ran across and just kind of scoping it out. There is a lot going on. And, I'm like, okay, everything's going to be to our front. The Tigris obviously presented a very large, kind of geographical barrier for anything besides, large large caliber, mortars and things like that. So nobody's going to be shooting at us from back here, at least not accurately. And as soon as I came to that kind of thought, conclusion, my radio operator screams RPG, and I turned around and he still had the radio attached to his face, but the cord was taut. He was dragging the 119 Foxtrot across the roof, like running for cover, so to speak. I ran up to their position across the roof, and I saw, live targets doing what live targets do. And because I was in a standing position and just came off of a dead sprint, I took one shot and I missed. I missed him, and I quickly re-racked the bolt, and I think I even yelled "fuck, I missed," and which makes it comical. And,
that really inspires confidence.
You're right. Like you had one job, Van Oosten. You had one job, and so I cleaned him up on the second one, and we just kind of. So I didn't have a time to think. I didn't have time to think about it. There was a live target that met the ROEs. Clearly, there were other Marines around, and obviously I'm making light of it now, but because I make light of everything. But I didn't have a lot of time to sit and think about it. It was, there's exactly what you're supposed to do. Do it now. Holy shit, you missed. Don't miss again. And that was kind of it. And then we just kind of started.
Does it ever start to build on you?
As far as what the aftermath of the live targets?
Not only the aftermath of the targets, but just the constant mission rotation, the constant going out, the constant being on hypervigilance. Does it ever start to wear on you? Because we've talked about before you start this, kind of the middle when you get to Baghdad and you get set up. Now, as we're going towards the end, does any of this ever start to grow on you?
I do. For me personally, and I can only speak for me personally, it really didn't start to weigh heavily on me until we were home and we had the long decompression period. In fact, I was a little upset that we did what we did. We took back, and I'm obviously painting a very broad brush. We did what we did, and once Baghdad was quote unquote secure, and the fire was kind of tamped out, or at least tamped out to the point where it was time to retrograde and have somebody backfill us in. I can remember belligerently say nothing about borderline begging to stay, to stay with the unit that was going, kind of do like a little inter-unit transfer. I just didn't feel like we were done. I thought that this can't be it. This can't be all of it. Whether that was for selfish reasons or turns out I was right. And it's not a question of being right or wrong. There was, as we saw, a lot more to do. And obviously I didn't get my way, and we ended up retrograding back, after the mission or the deployment was done. That weighed heavily on me. The fact that my team was going back and I was going to teach at Quantico. But, you make your choices, right? You make your decisions.
When does that deployment or combat, or however you want to say it, do you remember a moment where it becomes real for you?
100%. Yeah. I mean, as soon as we crossed the LOD, a couple funny stories. We had the chickens, for the NBC early. They had the chickens in the mesh cages on the hood, and the moon dust, from the sand was choking all the live NBC, early detection systems, that we had so it came over the radio like, is your chicken dead? Holy shit, my chicken's dead too. And everybody thought we were getting gassed already. But it really got real when my team first deployed shortly after, within hours of us crossing the LOD, and we had to make a short on-foot movement, kind of out into the darkness to one of the gas oil separation platforms. When I was looking at the Marines from Charlie Company, and I was, briefing them like, hey, my team is going 3 clicks in this direction. If you see a red star cluster, it means we're coming back in a hurry. Don't shoot at us. Obviously the exiting and re-entering of friendly lines is one of the most dangerous things anybody will ever do. And so at that moment I was like, okay, this is for realsies. Like, we're really doing this right now. We'd already taken 1 KIA, within, minutes, hours, whatever it was, of crossing the LOD, like looking at those lance corporals and corporals that were, holding the line, so to speak. I was like, this is it. Like, we're doing it for real this time.
I would just like to point out that when you talked about the chickens on there, you said that the dust was choking them out, and you almost said choking your chickens.
I sure did.
And I thought you caught yourself. So I just wanted to point out that I got your joke before you actually put it out there.
You find the humor in the craziest, like, but yeah, when they came over the radio, I mean, people lost their minds, and rightfully so. Nobody wants to get NBC'd, but yeah, the chickens were dropping left and right.
All right. So as it becomes real, as you see this, as you get done with your first deployment, you come back, you decompress, you see what has happened, what is still to come, because you were kind of guessing that before you ever left, what was still to come. I want to talk to you about an article that you were part of. And I think that this article talks a story from that deployment. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so the whole point of this article is to talk about snipers, because snipers won't talk to the media. They won't talk about the job. They don't want to do anything. And it says they know that there's a lot of people that have a problem with it. They think you're cowardly or whatever. I would like you to kind of talk about that in the beginning, because that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, especially with what you're doing. But I kind of want to know your thoughts on why you said it in that way.
Well, because, from a personal standpoint, it's one thing to kick in a door, to clear a corner, and to immediately, be faced with a 3-meter target that may or may not have the drop on you, and you don't, that's a level of fear and anxiety that, the choice is almost taken away from you, right? And so if I'm up on a rooftop and nobody is really either can see me if I'm from a concealed position, or they can see me but I'm out of range or what have you, it's, some people could say, well, your life was never really in that. Like, every target that I ever indexed, very few of them ever knew I was there, if that makes sense. And so
Absolutely.
and some did and some didn't, but the majority never, quote unquote, knew where it came from. And so, I don't, like, did I ever feel like the target that I was indexing was directly affecting me? Absolutely not. Was it affecting the Marines that were out and about? 100%. And that's what we're there to do, right? And, eye in the sky, angel overwatch, what have you, like I said, throw whatever term you want. But there was, every now and again you'd come across, like, all you do is hide and pick people off. Like, that's kind of a cowardly way of going about it. Well, I guess I can say I don't feel that way, but I could see where people would come to that conclusion, if that makes sense.
It's a very contradictory position, because you are detached away from the targets that you're engaging, but it's also a very intimate thing. It's you and it's them. And you even say in the article that you're always going to have some remorse because you're taking a human life. And that's kind of what I asked you a little earlier. Does it ever build up to you? Can you talk about and explain to people that dichotomy of it, of being so detached, but yet being so intimate?
Yeah, I can. And I wish I could coin the phrase, but I had a very, very close friend of mine say to me once, in one of these very similar conversations. He was a Ranger with multiple deployments, great dude, one of the best humans I know. And in the midst of our conversation, he said, "Hey man, don't ever forget, you're the bad guy in somebody else's story. Like, we're only the good guys because it's our team. But there's somebody somewhere, a lot of people in some cases, that are like, those guys on the roof, they changed, they were the bad guys, in that particular story." The remorse comes from, I don't have remorse about having to do my job. I guess if I had remorse, I wish we had never been there to begin with, if that makes sense. Like, in hindsight, all I wanted to do was to do my job. As soon as I got done doing my job, I was like, man, I did my job, but there's ripple effects that I'll never be aware of, but I know they're there. So that's kind of where the remorse comes in.
All right. So let's talk about the story that's actually in the article. And you talk about a young teenager. You're on the rooftop. Now, from what I understand in the article, you're exposed. You can be seen.
100%.
Okay, so you're exposed, which first off sets the story a little crazy anyway, because everyone always thinks of a sniper position as no one will be able to see you. It just happens and it's over. Like you said, a lot of people didn't know where it was coming from, but you're 100% being able to be seen. You see a teenager come out and the guy that's with you asks you, are you going to pull the trigger on it? And you tell him, quite frankly, if he picks up a weapon, he is a combatant. And I have to protect the other people. I kind of want to understand that conversation between the two of you, because you're both kind of there for the same job, but you both clearly have different thoughts on it.
Yeah, 100%. We, my partner and I had set up, and we had kind of started taking turns, if that makes sense. And because at one point very early on, he looked over at me and he was like, "Hey, asshole, you gonna let me get in on this or what?" And I was like, "Yeah, my bad," And so we started taking turns. The individual that questioned it was a spotter. He was an FO for the artillery unit, and super good dude. He just happened to be 5 feet to the left or whatever. And as these three individuals, we named them. Obviously, I'm like, hey, because we were on glass. And I said, hey, I got the kid. And yeah, I was like, I got the kid. I go, it looks like dad and grandpa, or dad and uncle, And my partner was like, I got uncle and grandpa, or uncle and dad. And they were heading towards. We had a little bit of a weapons pile that was kind of, because they'd come out and they'd grab, which they do. They come out and grab their KIA, but they'd strip them down, right? They'd strip them down and leave all the equipment and the weapons and stuff like that. And so I could remember a Somali veteran sniper who gave me a lot of guidance over the years, saying like that was a common tactic, is to don't if there's weapons laying around, somebody's going to come and try and retrieve it, and they were heading directly for our little stockpile of weapons. And it happened, fairly quickly. But when I said I have the kid, that's when the staff NCO forward observer said, "You're not going to drop him, are you?" And I said, I said, yeah, if he picks one of those things up, I'm going to drop him. And at that point, we yelled out to him. We're talking, 230, 250, not that far away. And I even held my sniper rifle above my head. I held it above my head because, of course, they stopped dead in their tracks. And then I gave the whole, not that this is universal, but, like, don't touch them.
It's pretty universal.
Like, you know what I mean? I'm like, don't touch that shit. If and I couldn't have done anything more besides don't touch it in Arabic. They just, they didn't heed our warnings, and they tried to retrieve those weapon systems, and we did our job in accordance with the ROEs. Not something, obviously, that I wear around on a t-shirt whatsoever, but it is what it is. No regret, but not remorse, if that makes sense. We gave them all the fair warnings we could. The only thing we didn't do was basically fire warning shots at them, which is obviously a kind of a no-no. And so yeah, at the end of the day, I had the ROEs. He met them, unfortunately, and so we did what we're there to do.
And so you say that's just the way it is in this article. That's how you explain it. That's just the way it is. How do you take someone that isn't military, isn't law enforcement, doesn't understand the thoughts that you just put out, because it's very blatant to a lot of people that have served in those positions? How do you explain it, or do you even want to explain it to people who don't know?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I'm usually one of those guys that if someone is asking me because they're genuinely curious, because they want to relate, or they're trying to understand, then I'm usually, and you can tell, you can tell the type of person and why they're asking. Then I'm usually pretty forthcoming in trying to explain, hey, there even in an instance where there seems to be no rules, there's still rules, and we play by them. But if somebody comes up to me because they want to be entertained, and I don't care how many free beers they throw at me, like I'm not I'm not going to entertain that individual because I'm not here. It's not something to be taken lightly. It's not it's not a sideshow. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's just kind of how
No,
I feel.
I think you did, and the way I look at it is from a law enforcement perspective. After a while, I've said it a lot of times before, you get very jaded and you don't care to explain it anymore. Because if a person has their opinion on what that is, you telling them is not going to change their opinion. I don't care who says, yeah, if you just talk, you'll make people. That's not true. You're not going to change someone's thoughts by explaining why you did it because they've never experienced it themselves.
100%. Yeah. And I'd like to say, you know, who am I in that instance? I'm just the guy that was unfortunate enough to be, to one, put himself in that position, but be confronted with that kind of decision. And, I guess the one thing I'm thankful for is I'm thankful it wasn't systemic. I'm sure it happened quite often. I'm sure it happened more than people, care to think about. I just happened to be a dude that got interviewed about it, shortly after leaving there. So I had a very, very good friend of mine, asked me once, do you think that story got implemented in some movies that have come out recently? And I went, no. I said, I don't think it's my story. I think it happened more often than people talk about. I just happen to be interviewed about it.
Now, I'm asking you as a sniper, did those movies display it well?
I think in a lot of instances, like all movies, I think they got a lot of things right. I think they did what most movies do, where they kind of fairy dust or sensationalize a lot of other things. I I'm one of those dudes where unless I was there and it happened to me, who am I to quote unquote judge? I was definitely entertained. It definitely jarred up a lot of old feelings, so to speak. I could relate to some of those movies very, very well. In the end, I thought they portrayed us in a very honorable and decent manner. Yeah, there's always going to be a little bit of Hollywood in it, right? Like they can't do it exactly the way it happened. I mean,
Absolutely.
right.
And I even go back to the Tom Berenger movie Sniper. That comes from a book that comes from supposedly a real life Marine, actually, and you're acting as a sheepdog to the flock. I think.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I couldn't agree more. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about they either love you or they hate you. And
Believe me.
right? No, I know you get it. And for the record, I think those Tom Berenger movies are awesome, and I got to meet him once, and it was fantastic. And we didn't. I was in advanced sniper school at the time, and he was filming number two, and he came to the schoolhouse obviously because he was using one of the gunnies as like a choreographer, if you will. And rest assured, we all shook his hand and we all said we loved his movies, but we didn't skip a beat when it came to busting his chops. And he took it well.
That's good to hear. I think there's like 14 of those sniper movies now. There's a
Yeah.
ton of them. He's got a son that's a sniper now. It's gone crazy now.
Fantastic.
All right, so you leave that combat deployment and you go to United States Marine Corps Scout Sniper Instructor course, correct? You're going to be
Yep, instructor
Right.
school at Quantico.
right. So you go there. Now, that's a very big switch from just being in combat, engaging real life targets, to being in a classroom environment, to being on the range. How do you go from going 100 miles an hour to 10 miles an hour?
That's a fantastic question. And it really, I can't, I want to say first and foremost that my time at Quantico and teaching, students, that was where I really, really learned the profession. And I had fantastic staff NCOs and NCO tutelage while I was there. Quantico was kind of the linchpin to the whole rest of my quote unquote career. Nothing shows that the art and the craft and the science by being able to push it towards 24 individuals that are fresh, have never done the job. I definitely would not be where I am today without that time at the schoolhouse. And It's because the science and the art and the knowledge was what was really pushed there. It wasn't just how many push-ups, how many flutter kicks, or how long can you go without sleep or food. Which obviously is an important part of the job, but how well do you know your craft? And so it may have seemed like it was 10 miles an hour from like a 30,000 foot optic, and obviously no one was shooting at us, but man, I was running uphill for the first 6 months to a year that I was there, honing my craft as an instructor. And I'd argue that standing up in front of those students, knowing what they were getting ready to go do once they graduated, was probably the most pressure I've ever felt in my life. Because if they do it right, it's because of you. If they do it wrong, it might be because of you. When they're doing it for realsies. So I took that job very, very seriously, and we all did. It definitely didn't feel like 10 miles an hour. It was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. Until I hit my stride, so to speak.
Well, yeah, and you pointed out very well that it's a 30,000 foot view. The way I look at it is action, action, action. Now you're in the classroom. Yes, it's a lot of pressure, but you would agree it's a different kind of pressure.
Yeah, different kind of pressure altogether, right? Yeah, and I had enough kind of decompression time where by the time I did get to Quantico, I buddied up right away with one of the other combat vets that was there. He had just come out of Afghanistan. So I kind of had that, that camaraderie. Not that I didn't have camaraderie with everybody that was there, don't get me wrong. But, me and the other guy that had just come out of Afghanistan clicked up immediately. And I knew most of the guys there from my time. In fact, my former chief scout in first time 5th Marines, as well as my S2 officer, my platoon commander, all within a year or two would all be there with me, and so it was kind of a little bit of I was never outside of my comfort zone as far as, tutelage, senior mentorship, and things of that nature. And all of the not getting shot at, not, crazy combat, shenanigans. We kind of took care of that in our off time, if that makes sense. There was a lot of fireside chats, if you will. And yeah, that's how that went.
So 2 questions come from that. First off, the 6 months, what are you doing? Because you say you were doing it to kind of catch up. You were running 100 miles an hour to catch up, kind of going uphill. First off, what are you doing to catch up? Because I would think when you leave what you just did, you'd be pretty honed in your skills. And number 2, do you think with the people that you were surrounded by, kind of staying in your comfort zone, do you think that helped you more than a lot of people get help of being comfortable and being able to tell what they're going through around them to where it doesn't become a barrier to them of moving on with their life?
Yes, I was very fortunate to have the people there that were there because they wouldn't they wouldn't let me misstep. I had just enough leash to make a boo-boo here or there, but it wasn't going to be to the detriment of the student, because that was one of the main focuses or the main pivot points was when you go through all sniper schools, whether it's first Mardiv, second Mardiv, Hawaii, there is an overwhelming emphasis on physical toughness. I'm not saying that there isn't a fair amount of curriculum. There's a large amount of curriculum that needs to be consumed, but you're almost always consuming it under a fair amount of stress. And, every circus has its own act, right? And so I went through 1st Marine Division Scout Sniper School, which was a crucible unto itself, right? I'm not saying attrition was the mission, but there was a fair amount, right? And then when you're training your platoon members back in your platoon, you kind of carry what they did to you at school, and you do that to your platoon members to prepare them for what they're going to encounter, right? Because the attrition rate is so high. So even though the things you're doing to them are fairly unkind, they're for a purpose. And the one pivot from that I saw at Quantico was, hey, this is Quantico, and anybody that's listening that taught at any of the other schools is going to blow my phone up and shit all over me, and it'll be hilarious. But we, because there's always that, there's always that, friendly, jabbing. Quantico, I remember my mentor said, this is Quantico. The school is hard enough. We need to teach them how to be snipers, not how to be hard. The school will teach them how to be hard. In other words, this is going to be kind of different than what you're used to. And you need to be a professor of your craft, not the hammer that tries to break students. And that stuck with me immediately. And obviously, as I bird dogged, the first basic course that went through, kind of an eye opening or epiphanical moment, like, well, when do we thrash them? When does the fire hose come out? When do they go without food and water? All the things that I was kind of used to. And, we don't really do that here. The no food and water, that comes later. But, there was an extraordinary emphasis placed on mastering the curriculum and the practical application. A lot less, let's run you till you die.
Did you ever see someone where you were like, holy shit, man, this guy's got it?
From the student body?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, quite a bit. Yeah, quite a bit. There was always a handful. And one thing with Quantico and all schoolhouses for that matter, you're always kind of on the lookout for your replacement because it's like a 3-year tour. And so if you have a handful of superstars, in a class, and most guys are fighting for their lives, you know what I mean? Most guys, it's a day-to-day, we had a big sign over the big engraved sign over the whiteboard that says all it takes is all you got. So most guys, like I said, they're I just need to make it to lunch. I just need to make it to dinner, so on and so forth. But you'd have superstars, and I kind of ID those guys and watch them. And there's always a handful at the top where, like, not only is he making it look easy, this guy's pretty talented. He may be a good instructor someday.
Did you ever get that guy where you're like, this guy is full of himself, and yes, he's good, but there's a possibility of him either getting hurt or fucking this up and not being able to recover from it?
Yeah, every now and again you'd have somebody that was, mentally and physically talented enough to where the pressure didn't really seem to be getting to him, if that makes sense, because there is a fair amount of evaluation of how they handle the pressure, not only in practical application and their scores, but their attitude and how they're, because when you're in a 2 or a 4-man team, how you deal with others and your attitude under duress, is obviously, like, I'd rather take a guy that's an 80% shooter and an 80%, curriculum graduate, but you could literally set the guy on fire and he'd say, give me more. That's kind of the guy you were looking for and the guy you'd want. Every now and again, you'd have that guy that was all of the above, but just didn't play well with others. And, you just gave that guy a little bit of extra attention and extra tutelage, and hopefully kind of right that ship, and one thing we kind of rested on was, if we can't crack that nut while he's here, he's definitely going to get cracked once he gets back to his platoon, because that shit is just kind of not tolerated,
What's interesting to me about it is that you talk about, that kind of personality, that kind of attitude. If we can't crack the nut, it will be when it goes back. But the flip side of that is, don't you agree that that's a very alpha dominated job?
Yes, it is. Yes.
And so you kind of have to have that, I don't want to say that above it all attitude, but you definitely have to be confident in yourself, confident in your team. Can you tell me how you kind of break those things up working in that kind of job?
I would say, again, from a personal optic, because every now and again because of course the instructors sit around and talk. You get the guy where I think he's a rock star and he doesn't do anything that, quote unquote, pings my radar or sets out red flags. And you might have 2 other instructors that are like, I want to murder that dude. You know what I mean? Because of X, Y, or Z. And, so you'd have healthy arguments and so on and so forth. But everything kind of would, to me, from a personal optic, I want you to be confident, not arrogant. I want you to be assertive, not belligerent, and let me, show me in your work, you know what I mean? If you're cleaning all the targets, if you're smoking all the tests, if you can do 500 push-ups in one sitting, blah, 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 then I'm going to give you a little bit of leeway, right? Because you're earning that, right? but it needs to be at the applicable time to the applicable person. And oh, by the way, just keep in mind, you're not giving yourself a lot of room for mistakes, if that makes sense. You know, so we would handle it on a very personal level. Because everybody would break up, you'd have anywhere from 4 to 6 guys that were kind of your guys, that you mentored over the course, whether it was the first part, the second part, or the third part, would usually rotate. It was a very personal one-on-one thing. At the end of each week, we'd sit down and have a little personal time. And it was sometimes a very one-way conversation. Like, hey, you're doing very, very well, but here are the things that you need to work on, and that's just how we handled it.
All right. So as you leave Quantico, now you're going to have to explain this unit, because in all the research I did on it and talking to you, the Augmentation Training Support Unit, you're going to have to explain what they do, what kind of their mission is, and what you were doing there.
Yeah, well, they really don't have one. And this is, I'm not trying to be super vague for any other purpose than I don't have a lot of the answers to your question. I found myself in that kind of holding pattern in this unit that was freshly stood up, and it was simply a unit for Marines that weren't in the kind of conventional atmosphere, if that makes sense. And I won't go into obviously extreme details about it, but it was simply a holding pattern in order to decide which one of those unconventional routes that I may or may not take. And it was short lived. I think it was only about a year and a half. Most of that I spent in schools, in preparation to go X, Y, or Z places. And in the long and the short of it, I left that unit kind of unceremoniously and went over to 3rd Recon Battalion, because my timeline, my enlistment, and the vacancies in some of these obscure duty stations weren't available. So I ended up just going over to 3rd Recon Battalion, not just going over, but that was what was available. They asked me if I wanted to go, and I said yes.
Well, when you leave there, you say unceremoniously. Was it time for you to go, or were you ready to go?
It was kind of both, kind of both. Like I said, I barely ever set foot in the place. All I did was PT and train and go to different schools, and I kind of had everybody's got a mentor in the service, and I had a mentor that was kind of telling me what steps to take to get to where I wanted to go, and the unit commander, or the unit, the small unit commander that was in charge of me, was like, he had different plans, right? He had, he's like, hey, I want you to go try and do this. And so it was kind of like, kind of a mom and dad story. And I had a much better relationship with dad than I had with mom. And, dad kind of was like, hey man, don't do it. Just wait, there'll be another opportunity. And so I told mom, I said, hey, I'm not doing what you're asking me to do. No thanks. And he was like, cool. Well, you got orders to Okinawa. I was like, roger that.
That's a horrible dinner table to sit at when mom and dad are going at each other.
Yeah, especially when dad's not there, yeah. I'm leaving.
You look like dad.
Yeah, a little bit, I would have given anything for him to be there to, save the day, but it is what it is. It all worked out.
All right, so we go to Okinawa, 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion, Amphibious Reconnaissance Platoon Sergeant. You're a subject matter expert now, Scout Sniper Operations for the battalion. You're a guest instructor for Special Operations. You're the primary instructor for Pre-Sniper Training Course, Platoon Sergeant responsibilities at the same time that you're doing all this training and instructing over Charlie Bravo and the Force Reconnaissance. So you have your plate full there.
Yeah, we hit the ground running for sure. And, get there, get introduced to the platoon, kind of in a rebuilding phase. And if there was ever a time in the Marine Corps where I kind of lost track of time and wasn't, wasn't staring at a calendar, it was, that unit is very fluid. You can be in one platoon one minute and in another platoon the next. And it just depends on the MU cycle and the MU rotation. And then obviously we still had people in Iraq and Afghanistan. So my first platoon was a MU. So we did all of our training, obviously, in preparation and on the MU itself. That was my first platoon. And And then my second platoon, obviously, we did a lot of jumping. It was not a MEU platoon. We did a lot of jumping down in the Philippines, a lot of CQB, so on and so forth. And, as far as the transition from, a battalion greenside platoon to, a force company or a direct action platoon, once again, that was literally one of the master sergeants coming into the hangar one day and being like, hey, guess what, guys? As of right now, you're you're now the force platoon, for this upcoming MEU. Like, it happened that quick, which was something kind of very foreign to me in my upbringing, because I remember looking at the master sergeant being like, what, it's that easy, it's that quick. Like, we just kind of switch t-shirts, and he's like, yep, that's how it goes, and I think the reason for that, because I didn't spend a long enough time there. It's not like I spent 4 years there. It ended up being like, 2 and change, if that. I did, the MEU cycle is constant. So almost like Fast Company, I mean, that place was kind of a ghost town. If you were a platoon in training cycle, then that's kind of all you saw was your platoon mates. And then there might be a handful of other platoons being rebuilt or whatever, but you either had platoons on the MEU actively floating, or you had platoons getting ready to go, or you had platoons in Iraq or Afghanistan. So it was an interesting time, to be sure.
Now we're reaching about the 12-year mark right now. Are we getting close to stepping away from the Marine Corps?
We're definitely getting close. I got in a little bit of trouble. I got launched off my MEU off the coast of Thailand, which is a hilarious story. But, definitely stand by my decisions and why I got booted. But looking, it wasn't funny at the time, but I definitely laugh about it now.
Can we talk about it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I had a very strenuous relationship, to say the least. And let me say this: before any of this kind of happened, I 100% kind of knew I was getting out, or I was at least 90% sure. So, my bullshit meter was probably, concreted at 0, if not into the negatives. And all I cared about was my Marines, how they were taken care of, how they were being treated, and how they were being trained. End of story. I had a fantastic platoon commander. I had a fantastic platoon, but I had a very, very strained relationship with some of the MEU staff, and particularly one of the MEU S2s. And that MEU S2 and I just went at it left and right, all the way throughout the entire workup and even onto the boat. Once we were on the boat, skipping all the gory details, there was definitely a conversation that came to a head where, in my opinion, she did some things to hamstring the capabilities of my platoon, given the fact that I wasn't available when decisions were being made. And I didn't agree with those decisions. And I let her know that in a very, belligerent and pointed way. I definitely spoke to that individual in ways that officers aren't used to being, spoken to or addressed. And like 72 hours later, I was standing on a pier in Thailand as the ship pulled away, and I thought, this is interesting. I wonder how I'm going to get back to Okinawa. Yeah, the platoon commander came down and said, hey, man, I think they're going to kick you off the boat. And I said, they can try. 24 hours later, he's like, yeah, they're kicking you off the boat. You got 45 minutes to be on the pier. I was like, roger that. So I packed up all my stuff and thought, this is surreal. And the ship pulled away, and I turned around and looked at Pattaya Beach, Thailand for a good 25 minutes thinking I could really make a story out of this. But then, I could really do this right. I'm already probably in deep shit. I might as well, go all in subsurface. But I actually found a high-speed vessel that I saw Marines were loading cargo onto, and I wandered down there and said, hey, are you guys, where's this vessel going? And they said, we're going to the Philippines, and then we're going back to Okinawa. I said, can I get on? They said, we don't give a shit. And so I got on that boat and eventually made it back to Okinawa and, got right in my car and drove up to the battalion and went right into the sergeant major's office and said, you probably want to talk to me, and he did. Told him my version of the story. He gave me a little head nod and said, I understand. I'm going to give you another platoon. Just go down to the Philippines and jump for a couple months until you get out. And so I did.
All right. So what rank are you at right now? You a gunny?
I'm a staff sergeant, but I had been selected for gunny.
Okay. So going back to that story without the gory details, S2, what rank are they?
Captain.
That's what I was thinking. So you got a captain, staff sergeant. Now, how much real world experience had you had by this point, and how much real world experience had that S2 had by this point?
I definitely can't speak for the S2, but I can say this. I had all my deployments up until that was my second 31st MU. And I will say this, and I said this to the sergeant major. I said, hey, I may not be or haven't been the most cordial guy to work with because like I said, my bullshit meter was kind of pegged and there was a lot of it. But I frequently made the loud comment like, "Hey guys, the war's the other direction," and probably fairly unprofessional, but that was kind of my jab of like, "Hey, you guys are not taking anything away from the 31st MU. They're out there for a reason," but it was, like I said, if there was ever a collection of pincushions, with brass on their collars that I poke holes into, they came out of the 31st MU. Kind of a strange bunch, Like I said, we were there to train. We wanted to train, and in my opinion, they were doing everything they could to ensure that that wasn't happening. So obviously, I took issue with that.
All right, so that begs the question then. You do all this time, you do all these deployments, you build up your resumes, you've done pretty much everything that you wanted to do. Is this a shitty way to leave the Marines?
Yeah, it kind of was. Well, in some ways, it obviously concreted my decision. I definitely didn't want to. I definitely never wanted to find myself in that situation ever again. Because let's be honest, if I had been in a more play the game mindset versus I'm not playing this game anymore. Like there's things that matter and there's things that don't, and everybody's kind of playing make believe, and I'm not like, and I could have had a whole different set of of officers, so to speak, that didn't have a giant case of the ass that I wasn't 100% conforming, if that makes sense. So it was kind of a perfect storm. I wasn't going to budge, and I wasn't playing along, and they had definitely, obviously, not come across somebody with my level of belligerence. In fact, my platoon commander, I said, when my platoon commander said, "Hey, they're going to make me fire you," I said, "What are they saying?" And he said, "The words adversarial and confrontational are being used a lot." So, I said, "So I'm getting fired for being an asshole?" He goes, "Pretty much." I said, "Do you want me fired?" He goes, "I don't want you fired. I love you. The Marines love you." He goes, "But they hate your guts up on the blue deck." And I said, "Well, last time I checked, I wasn't running a petting zoo. So if I got to get off the boat, I got to get off the boat." And I did.
You as a guy, and you said this back earlier in our conversation, you said you drank the Kool-Aid through a hose. So what made that switch happen where your bullshit meter's down to zero and you're not really drinking the Kool-Aid anymore?
I think it was when I got over to 3rd Recon Battalion, and I had a vision, and I'm not saying anything bad about 3rd Recon Battalion as a whole. I'm just saying it was a very strange time where if you weren't on the MU and you weren't forward deployed in a combat zone, it was just kind of you were in kind of a holding period, or just like you said, it wasn't 10 miles an hour, but it might have been 50. There's a lot of training restrictions on Okinawa, the island of Okinawa, where everyday training that I thought should be taking place, two things. One, I didn't know how to do. That was my first time being a platoon sergeant. My first time being a platoon sergeant on the island. And, so just one of the instances was like, hey, I want to get all my guys, pistol qualified so that they've got their cards, coaches, X, Y, and Z, just kind of basic, easy to do training evolutions that will bode well for the Marines later on in their career. Because you got to remember, most of the Marines on Okinawa, if they're not a platoon sergeant, or E5 and above, they're probably on their first enlistment. So I was trying to do things not only to, train them for the quote unquote, next, 3-meter target. It was just, hey, thinking down, your second enlistment, your third enlistment, these are some boxes you want to check, right? you want to get dive, you want to get jump, you want to get sniper school, so on and so forth. But there's other little things too, right, that can help you along the way. And it was just very, very hard to do and not a priority on the island of Okinawa. Okinawa is a very, very difficult place unless you're one of those guys that kind of goes to the island, falls in love with it, and stays there. And those guys obviously run that place, like it's the mafia. I wasn't there long enough to figure it out. I made a ton of mistakes as a platoon sergeant, and luckily I had a fantastic platoon. But yeah, it was just very, very thankful for my time there. But it definitely towards the end kind of concreted my desire to leave, because I said if it's going to be this hard to do kind of basic things, I don't. This is a fight I don't think I should be fighting or having to fight, if that makes sense.
It just seems very odd that you reached the level that you are. You're picked for gunny. I mean, you're pretty much, you're halfway done with over halfway done with a 20-year career. And I almost wonder the questions, though, when you say you made a lot of mistakes as a platoon sergeant. Mistakes in your eyes or mistakes in the Marines' eyes?
Probably both. It definitely above me. There was a lot of quote unquote mistakes that were made. Like I said, and then how it is once, and I would never ever play the victim card. I'm definitely not a victim. I got everything I asked for, and well deserved. But once you kind of get that target on you, it doesn't matter. The old saying, you build 1,000 bridges, blah blah blah. That was the first time in my Marine Corps career ever where I felt like I had to kind of watch my back, if that makes sense. And it's a very unsettling feeling. And I thought, I'm not. This isn't, after almost 12 years, and I'm just now getting this feeling. I don't want to continue. I'm not going to do another 9 years kind of looking over my shoulder, so to speak. That may sound dramatic. That's just how I felt.
No, but do you think that would have carried, when you leave Okinawa, would that have carried on to your next duty station, you think? I mean, do you think it was that bad where it would have followed you?
I don't think so. I mean, even at the tail end of my Okinawan deployment, a lot of the E6 and above who had never met me or never worked with me or never got to quote unquote hear my side of the story. And to be fair, I would probably be the same way if I was in their shoes. Getting relieved as a platoon sergeant is kind of a big deal, and especially. Especially if they're willing to just leave you in Thailand,
Yeah, now that I gotta tell you, that's the craziest fucking thing I've ever heard. That a boat dropped you off on the dock and pulled the fuck away, and just no one even waved. Everyone just pulled away and kept going.
I definitely stood there with my sea bag and my kit and was like, maybe they'll come back, but they didn't.
They were just testing you.
Yeah, yeah, it was crazy. Yeah, it was definitely bizarre, and that's why I enjoy telling the story, because it's almost hard to believe. Like, we don't care, just get off the boat. I'm like, Roger that. Okay, I'll figure it out. And I'm a recon Marine, but I'm positive I can't swim that far. So I found another boat. Yeah, I was starting to have that feeling in my gut that hey, maybe this has run its course. I'm just shy of 12 years. A minute longer than 12 years, you're like you said, you're kind of throwing that 20 away. I didn't like staring Gunny in the face. I didn't like the thought of picking up Gunny. They weren't taking anybody higher than an E5, and sometimes not even senior E5s in the MARSOC at the time. And so I just felt like I've checked all the boxes that I initially wanted to check when I came into the service. And maybe now is just a time to part ways before I get super, super bitter, and spend that next 9 years or whatever and getting out and, hating it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I still look
Right.
back on it now. I had, a couple of hilarious times, and, overall it was a fantastic experience. I think if I would have stayed, it would not have turned out like that.
Okay. So you go do what you have to do. You get done. You go out. Any regrets as you get out? Do you think At any point in time, do you think, oh shit, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe I should have stayed in? Because you hear a lot of guys say they step away and then they're like, uh-oh, maybe I should go back. And they do go back, or they just think about it a lot. Was that ever a problem with you?
Yeah, it really was, and I think anybody, unless they step into something that's got nine zeros behind it, I think everybody at some point goes, maybe whether it's the camaraderie, or the security of the first and the 15th, or the adventure, or the what have you. I think anybody that says that if they do get out, kind of halfway through, I think they feel that, in some way, shape, or form. And there was definitely days, because I was out for a good, let's say, a year ish, kind of in limbo, trying to get on to the next adventure. And there was plenty of times where I was like, man, maybe I have made a mistake. Like, maybe it wasn't that bad, yada, yada, yada. And it wasn't that bad. You know what I'm saying? I just had a salty last, year, if that makes sense. So yeah, of course. Now, luckily I had my wife, who we grew up together, dated all through high school. She was in the Marine Corps as well, just as long. She had just gotten out as well. And so we kind of over dinner would be like, are we making the right decisions? Did we make the right decisions? And, at the end of the day, our guts always told us that we were making the right decisions. And I obviously, I think we did.
With her being in the Marine Corps too, does that make it easier or does that make it harder? I know she stepped away, but does that make it easier or harder for you?
To step away, or just the Marine Corps as a whole?
Well, let's go both with that, because I think that's a good point, because you're both trying to have careers. And then at the end, when she steps away, I would almost think that your bullshit meter was already there. It's almost easier to go, okay, she stepped away. Man, it's going to be a cakewalk for me to step away.
It was almost a strange paradigm shift, because she stepped away and walked into something, basically walked out in camis one day and, in civilian attire the next, almost doing the exact same job. And she was a rock star. She still is. Held in very high regard. She was, a very, very passionate Marine. And I'm not just saying that because she's my wife. I'm saying it because, in some ways she was more of a Marine than I'll ever be. She was the one that actually ended up having kind of some long-term, like, man, I shouldn't have gotten out. I just had that year transitional period where I was bar backing, I was doing odd jobs, I was working PSD, like I was just kind of floating around in the DC area doing, whatever would, kind of pay the bills. And, and we've always been obviously a very, synchronized unit, where if I'm kind of down, she picks up the slack and vice versa. And so not only was she picking up the slack, but right around the time where I started my new adventure, that's when she, kind of was like, maybe I made a mistake. I talked her out of it. We had a death in the family. We ended up moving back home. He was a Marine KIA over in Afghanistan. And, things just happen the way they happen. If we sit down now, this many years later, and say, man, should we have stayed in? Almost the unequivocal answer is no, we did the right thing. You had a couple kids in there and so on and so forth. So, did that come across our ticker tape often? Sure, it did. I think it comes across a lot of people's ticker tape, but we just kept driving forward. I never picked up the phone and said, hey, start the paperwork. I just kept pushing forward.
A question to that would be, though, to tack on to it, and if you don't want to answer, please don't. But when she steps away and she's in camis one day, civilian clothes the other day, doing almost the exact same job, kind of rock starring it out of the Marine Corps, you're bar backing, PSD, kind of jumping job to job.
Yeah.
Envy ever happen? Jealousy ever happen? Anger ever happen? Anything like that with you as you're stepping away from it? Because that's a very dangerous cocktail to mix together.
Oh yeah. And I think, yeah, I mean, yes to all of it, and just never kind of at the same time. There was that, if she was down here, she'd tell you I was always kind of the driving force of where we went and what we did. She was always, the absolute best partner you could ever have, and fortunate enough that her, not only her chosen profession, as a Marine, but her reputation always found her a job and a seat no matter where we went. So yeah, there was all of that, just never kind of at the same time. And anybody that's, whether it's law enforcement or firefighters or first responders or military, especially when you're dual service, I think anybody that says there's not those times is, probably not being truthful, and I was always very thankful that she could, step into what she stepped into. But it turned out that in the civilian aspect of it, there wasn't near the responsibility. She was kind of the king of the castle, when she was in camis, and then once she went into the civilian role, a lot of that responsibility was stripped away, and that was what was disenfranchised. She was disenfranchised by that. She says, "Hey, I'm used to doing a lot more. I can't just sit here. I don't care if it's double the pay or what have you. I need to be challenged. I need to be X, Y, and Z." And so, so she left that, and we came home, and I continued to do what I was trying to do. And, for quite some time, there was, maybe I should go back in and so on and so forth. But we just always landed on no. That was then, this is now. We're just going to make this work.
And I've found that it's easy to remember the good times. It's hard to remember the bad times. I've noticed that about a lot of things. When you think about it, it gets very, very starstruck in your eyes of, oh, remember when we did this, and you don't remember all the bullshit that came behind it.
Yeah, when there was so much of it. Yeah, you're 100% correct. Yeah, you only remember the good stuff.
Right. All right, so you get out, you're contracting now, working with BlackWater. Now, you also are, I'm trying to figure out, so you did United States stuff plus securing our country. So this is where you're going to Afghanistan and Israel, correct?
Yep, I started out as a BlackWater contractor. I had a bunch of friends that were in sniper school as instructors with me that had, gotten out of the Marine Corps a couple years, 4, 6, ahead of me, and were kind of doing that job. And full disclosure, I didn't have any idea what they were doing. I just knew that I kind of wanted in, right? And so I made a couple phone calls, and there was, obviously a selection process, and I was BlackWater for a little bit, and then BlackWater lost the contract, and a company called SOC picked it up. And then I was a SOC guy forever, and forever, I say forever, it seemed like forever. So yeah, we I just did the contracting, the 90 days on, 30 days off, or 60-60, and you went wherever they sent you, had an absolute blast. Yeah, that was it for the next, 12 years, minus the instructor time.
Well, and that was my question. So we just talked about, you remember the good times with the bad. As you go back to a contractor, you go to Afghanistan, you go to Israel, you're working these jobs, 60 on, 60 off, or however they do your schedule. Is it almost like the perfect way to do that job? You're doing what you like to do. You're being at the front line. You're doing what you knew you were meant to do without a lot of the bullshit coming behind it, a lot of the bureaucracy coming behind it. Is that why it's so fulfilling?
Yeah, it's well, one, first and foremost, it's the guys that you're around. The guys that you're around are, just the best guys. You know what I'm saying? From all branches, and with proven records and so on and so forth. And so the talent pool is, uncanny. You know what I mean? And so you're always learning. You're always being improved. You're very autonomous, and much like in the sniper platoons, you were kind of looked at, you're looked at as a subject matter expert in order to accomplish certain tasks. And always, rarely the same task twice, right? And it was always a different puzzle to solve, so to speak. And so very fulfilling in that way. And I'm painting a rosy picture. There was definitely, you talked about bureaucracy. I don't think, I think it's tough to beat the Marine Corps when it comes to, fiery hoops that you got to jump through. But, there's always going to be a fair amount of, bureaucracy. But at the end of the day, it's a mission driven, organization. And we were there to get certain jobs done. We accomplished those tasks. And, it was just a pleasure to work with that caliber of individual in all fronts. I'm not just talking about the paramilitary guys. So yeah, I think, I tell people all the time that ask, and even younger guys that are thinking about kind of going down that path, and I give them the good and the bad, because obviously there's a fair amount of both, depending on how you look at it. But as far as had I not had that to transition into, I can't fathom how I would have handled it, right? Because going all the way back to your question, like, I think had I not transitioned into what I transitioned to, there is a fair chance that I would have been, visiting a prior service recruiter, But what I transitioned to, gave me kind of, like you said, the best of both worlds.
Do you think it gave you purpose again? Because a lot of guys say they get out, they don't have any purpose, they don't have any mission. Do you think that that's what saved you from maybe going down that dark road?
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. Because you're with your people, so to speak, right? You're with your people, and once again, you're transitioning into something that's very, very new in a lot of ways. And obviously you're there because of what you know how to do, kind of your old life, so to speak, or your prior training and prior experience. But because it was always a different puzzle, it was always a new problem to solve. That and the fact that, to the left and the right of you, you kind of got to, the same guy that said, "Hey, don't forget we're the bad guy in somebody else's story." He was always like, "I've never had to swim so hard to keep up." He's true in a lot of ways. Like, you couldn't slack. You couldn't slack, because if you did slack,
It's
your
on you.
contract, right? Yeah, it's not going to be a slap on the wrist. It's going to be like, guess what? Your contract's not renewed. So there was plenty of incentive to do your best work.
And there's a real, I guess you would say, as crazy as it sounds, a liberating freedom to having that job where it's always going to be there.
Oh, sure, without a doubt. There's definitely, there's definitely that. I don't want to say a tendency, but you can, when they're not going to kick you out, and as long as I don't get a DUI or kill somebody on accident that wasn't supposed to be killed, I'm probably going to be fine, to where, this particular new adventure, I don't want to say you could sneeze the wrong way and be gone, but,
You could sneeze the wrong way and be gone.
Depending on who you sneeze in front of, yeah, that could be it, So mind your P's and Q's and do your job to the best of your ability.
Now, in this kind of adventure, as you like to call it, you met your now business partner, correct?
Yeah, Matt. Yep.
And so, can we kind of talk about how that relationship kind of flourished, how you guys would come to work with each other even after all that's over?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Matt was one of my first team leaders when I got over there, and one of my mentors / team leaders that was with me in 1st Battalion, 5th Marines. He was with me at Quantico Sniper School. Anybody that's listening that knows us is going to say, "Hey, Hoot's been riding this guy's coattails, since 2000 when they met," and that's fair, because this guy and I have always been kind of co-located in one way or another. He was the first guy I called when I was like, "Hey, I'm thinking about getting out." And he kind of pointed me in the right direction because he'd been there for a while. So when I showed up, although that individual wasn't there, he'd thankfully been singing my praises, for a long time prior to me showing up. And so when I met Matt, Matt was like, "Hey, nice to meet you. I feel like I already know you. Don't prove your friend wrong." Kind of got the new guy treatment, so to speak, right? He took me under his wing. Matt did, and showed me the ropes. He was an excellent teacher, kind of what was important, what wasn't, how to do things correctly. That crucial kind of paradigm shift between, what I used to do versus how it's applicable now. And so Matt and I became very good friends, and we did a lot of work together. And over the years, we happened to be on kind of like the same rotation. And I learned, like I said, I ended up kind of taking over for him when he left. And Matt had decided to leave and pursue other stateside work because he had been doing it a much longer than I had when I showed up. Basically, once he left, I continued to work and do the rotations, but we never lost contact. And it was a periodic text, "Hey man, how are the kids? What's going on?" So on and so forth. And then one day he called me out of the blue and said, "Hey, I've got this idea for this company called Nomadic Research, and I'd like you to be a partner. I'd like you to, to do this with me. I was teaching at the time. I said, that's fantastic. What do you need from me? And he's like, I don't need much. I just need a partner. And I want you to be it, And I said, well, that's easy. I'm in, and that was 3 or 4 years ago now. And we've been, plugging away at it ever since. The best we can do, just, one SEAL and one, two knuckle draggers, one SEAL and one jarhead, just trying to make it.
Well, I want to point out before you get out, I'd like to go back to your career, and then I want to get into these companies. When you look back on your career, because now we're into pure civilian phase, when you look back over your military career, your contracting career, anything that you'd change?
Oh man. I think there's always some things in kind of retrospect that you do different, but being able to pinpoint anything specifically, I mean, nothing screams out at me. I'm sure if I sat here for an hour, in deep reflection, and be like, man, I really wish I had done X, Y, or Z. But I'm kind of one of those dudes where, hey, man, you make your decision, you make your tactical decision or your personal decision, you execute, and then, if you don't like the answer, then you just fix it. You just, on to the next. You know what I mean? And so I don't spend a lot of time looking back. So maybe the short answer to your question is no. There's not much. Every place I was ever at, I was very, very thankful for and gleaned, I think, as much as I could glean from it. And then once I thought I had kind of wrung the towel out, then I would just move on, hoping that I left a good reputation and a good mark as I left. Yeah, I don't think I would change too much.
Okay. Since you said all that, biggest lesson you learned?
Biggest lesson I learned, I would say humility. Realize how often you're wrong. There was a lot of things that we used to do that we thought were law, whether it comes to like the sniper sciences or the ballistics or the, definitely some of the finer points of the art that, we died on those hills because somebody above us taught us that without really having the ability to extrapolate the data and realize how wrong we were. How many people didn't pass or didn't graduate because of improper knowledge that had been imparted on us. I stepped away from the sniper community for, let's call it, 3 to 4 years. And when I came back to it, it was, I barely could understand what they were saying. It was like I jumped from Razor flip phone to iPhone 9. It's like I was severely taken back. So I was wrong a lot. We were wrong a lot, and so I think the biggest thing I took away from it was be humble. Humility is key. Emotion degrades credibility, and always consider that you might be wrong. Keep an open mind. And that's kind of the, emotion degrades credibility, and think about the fact that you could be wrong. Try and think of everything from all kind of angles of the compass, and then make the best tactical decision, or at least come to the best group tactical decision that you can come to. But the minute you think you've got it all nailed down pat, it's you're probably wrong, more than likely.
More than likely. All right, let's move into these companies, because this is a different approach for you. It's owning a company. Like you said, it's you, and if it doesn't work, it's you. And if it succeeds, it's you. So everywhere around you, it's you. It has nothing to do with a team or anything else. Can you talk about going from being a Marine, being a contractor, into being an owner and really a plank holder in both these companies?
Yeah, it's it's one of those things where if you sit and think about it too hard for too long, you probably have an anxiety attack. There's a lot riding on it. So I think we just kind of keep, focus locked on like the 3-meter target, the 5-meter target, the 7-meter target, and just keep trying to make the right decision. or decisions, period. And at the end of the day, with 102250, whether it's me at 102250 in my consulting company, or my half or my part in Nomadic Research, is it's apples and oranges, so to speak. With Nomadic Research, we want to make the best gear that guys like us and that people that are doing amazing things, they're using our equipment confidently, and knowing that a lot of thought and effort and passion have been put into it. A lot of our guys, our former teammates, are carrying our gear and equipment around and praising us with confidence, and that speaks highly of the equipment, because it's a community obviously that doesn't isn't keen to throwing around compliments, so that's kind of a feather in our cap. But yeah, it's a lot. I'd be lying to you if I didn't say, right before the melatonin kicks in each night, staring at the ceiling, there's there's a lot that kind of goes across the ticker tape. Sometimes these things don't work out, but we don't think like that. We just keep moving on to the next target.
All right, I'm going to put you on the spot. What makes your stuff so great?
I think the amount of time, effort, and once again, thought process that we put into it. We didn't, cut corners. We didn't go cheap. We wanted to make gear and apparel that guys like us and guys that are, quote unquote, above us in the tier system, in the what have you, the people that are doing extreme things, either on the military side, the law enforcement side, first responders, and the adrenaline junkies, they put it to the test and they can't break it. They put it to the test and they come out with 2 thumbs up. You're never going to make anything that's perfect, that goes without some type of critique, because that's just obviously like what guys like us do. But if there's 10 things that we're asking for reviews on, and I get 9 badasses and 1, have you thought about this? That's a win in my book. Because that's just the nature of the beast. We just don't cut any corners, and like Matt likes to say, I'm not half-assing any of this. It's got to be the best. It's got to be the best out there, and so that's what we strive for.
So when people go to your company, when they go to your website, what can they expect to find?
So our best sellers right now, obviously, are raid packs. We've got 2 different raid systems that are doing very well. We had a truck bag line, which is like your nuclear tote truck bag that was a hit, and they sold out very, very quickly. We've also got a chest rig / fanny pack, and then which moves quite a bit, and then a lot of organizational accessories that go in. Like, each piece of equipment can be accessorized with obviously the packing cubes and the admin organizers that we have on the site. So everything kind of complements each other and is built around, especially like if you talk about the TTL, or the tag target locate bag, is our executive travel bag that just got released not too long ago. Rave reviews with that, and it's if the assault bag is your 3-day pack, then the TTL is more like your 7 to 14-day pack, depending on if you know how to pack correctly, with all your admin and stuff that goes along with it. So everything that we have on the site went through months, if not years, of, in all environments that we could muster, whether it was taking it on hunts. I used that TTL bag for probably almost a year and a half straight before we said, fix this, change this, and we're ready to go. So once again, not to sound cliche, but the thought and effort in the design and the testing phase, makes us very, very confident with the products that we have, available to date.
Brand new person that's getting into using this kind of gear, because you said that this gear is being used out in the field. Someone brand new into it that just wants to kind of take a stroll, what of your equipment should they be taking out?
I think they should take either one of the raid packs, either the raid light or the raid heavy, depending on its application. And, once again, see if they can break it. I challenge you, minus using it for target practice, or, strapping a thermite grenade to it, put it to the test, and we're all ears, because we definitely tried to break it before we put it on the site. The raid packs are a hit. The TTLs are great for, like I said, kind of your executive or day-to-day travel, vacation pack, and everything else is kind of up to the individual user. The packing cubes, are a big hit for just. I don't need a whole new rig. I just need packing cubes. The laptop, organizer. I pull that out in front of guys, and they're like, "Holy shit, that thing's badass." So yeah, just I challenge them to break it. Because I don't think that you can.
I like that you challenge people to do that. I think it really kind of puts emphasis on how much you trust your gear. If that's the first thing out of someone's mouth that's selling you something, see if you can break it and then bring it back to me. I think that shows an extreme amount of trust. Let's talk a little about the clothes, the outerwear and things like that. We've talked a lot about the packs and accessories. Let's talk about the clothes, because you got some fucking awesome hoodies and stuff.
Oh, I appreciate it, man. Yeah, we started off with the hoodies and the hats and the t-shirt as we, kind of stair-stepped into the technical apparel and the gear, because obviously nothing happens overnight. And oh, by the way, we kind of cut our ribbons, so to speak, a week or two before COVID hit. So we had a lot of, COVID related issues as far as production, shipping, so on and so forth. So I used to joke. I said, I feel like we're Donkey Kong, and somebody's just throwing barrels at us from the top of the, the trying to get to the top of the ladder. But as startups go, I think that's natural. But the jackets, yeah, super proud of the jackets. The Alpine, it's a layering system, obviously. The Alpine hoodie and the shell, the shell is, basically what we were going for was, pick your top level brands, right? Pick your top level brands, top level quality brands. And we wanted to mimic those in quality and craftsmanship, but we also wanted to get away and have kind of a no China policy. And while our products aren't, American made materials assembled overseas, we stay away from China. We have a no China policy, and we're doing the best we can to keep it as American made or American assembled as humanly possible. But it just, the state of where we're all at currently right now, it's very, very difficult to do. Like I said, so we're doing our best to, stay to it's true to that as possible. Super proud of the jackets, the hoodies, the zip up hoodies, the Alpine hoodies. It's perfect for a multitude of environments. Obviously, once you layer it up, though, I tell you what, I'm not afraid to say it. Like, once you layer it up and you got the layering system all in place, you're ready for winter and the worst of it. I mean, they are comfy, they are cozy, and once again, we put as much thought, effort, and passion into it as humanly possible, and we want to see where it goes from there.
Absolutely. And you're doing consultation for not only the United States government, but DOD, law enforcement. So, I mean, it's rolling. Like we talked about this whole time, when you go at it, you go full bore into everything. So is there anything that you would like to talk about 10/22/50?
I would just say, yeah. I mean, if anybody's, it's a word of mouth, obviously type of company. I've got a lot of ambassadors in a lot of places, and I'd like to say non-paid ambassadors. The equipment kind of speaks for itself. Matt and I are obviously very, very proud of it. I don't advertise it. It's quote unquote sensitive in nature, and so that's kind of my handshake to the individuals, whether it's, the organizations, the units, or the individual operators. That's kind of my handshake to them, where I'm trying to keep it as, sensitive as possible and not advertise it. But if you visit the website and you have questions about it, obviously myself or Jennifer are going to answer.
Looking back on everything that we've talked about tonight, is there any kind of advice, any piece of information that you want to give to someone out there, whether that is about joining the Marines, whether it's about a longevity of career, whether it's about getting into the business world? What is Hoot going to give as a piece of advice to the world?
I'd say to them, the same thing I say to my 17-year-old. don't take no for an answer. If you want it and you want it bad enough and you're positive, then shoot a reverse azimuth, figure out the steps that you got to take to get to your end state, and then just start attacking those targets from near to far, and just don't take no for an answer. Always have a primary, alternate, and tertiary route, and it doesn't matter, what the end state is, and just everybody along the way is going to tell you that it can't be done. Everybody, everything I ever did was somebody at some point or multiple people told me, that's not you, you're not good enough, you're not the guy, so on and so forth. And not only don't take no for an answer, but use that as fuel. I would encourage guys that are transitioning out, to think big and as much passion and effort that they put into their military occupational specialty, just apply that to the business world. And moreover, everything that we learned in the service, if you apply it to the civilian world, I think you're head and shoulders above the rest if you can stay disciplined and stick to it. And I'm not shopping for helicopters at present, you know what I'm saying? I'm not sitting here burning hundreds for heat, but by any stretch of the imagination, enjoy the process. It's as many times as you got kicked in the teeth in the mill, you're going to get kicked in the teeth out here, and just smile back and keep pressing. Like, that's what I would say.
All right. Where can people find your companies, and where can people find you?
Yeah, perfect. So obviously Nomadic Research at nomadicresearch.com, and then obviously 102250 as well. The www dot, all that good stuff. 102250, it's spelled TEN, number two, FIFTY, and then Nomadic Research is just that, So we're on Instagram, or the websites are the websites, and yeah, hit us up, check us out, and let us know what you think. If you break it, we want to know about it.
All right, man. I'm so happy you've been on here. I have had a great time talking to you. You have some wild stories. Guys, you know where you can find Hoot. Now, let's talk about where you can find me. As always, you can find me on Instagram, the DTD_podcast. You can find me on Facebook at the DTD Podcast, and you can find me on YouTube, where all these conversations, they're in video form. But your one-stop shop, it's going to be dtdpodcast.net. It's going to have audio, video. Hoot's going to have his own page. It's going to have the links to everything that he wants you to see. It's going to have pictures of him throughout his multiple careers and connections for you to get in touch with him about the businesses that he's running. Now that we've talked about all that, let's talk about our sponsors. Guess what, guys? Police Coffee. The new one came out. It's here now. Everybody's heard of him. Everybody knows about him. Introducing Lieutenant Colonel Grossman, Sheepdog on Duty. It's a sponsored coffee by one of the great supporters of the police community, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, the Sheepdog himself. South American coffee blend just for our heroic men and women in blue. And don't forget, it's roast to ship, so it's the freshest high quality around. Now let's talk about flavor. One Ranger, the newest flavored coffee you're sure to love. It's flavorful, medium-bodied, and it's got a rich, sweety, nutty, and buttery flavor that cuts right through the coffee's acidity. Guys, go ahead, treat yourself and your fellow people to a bag of Lieutenant Colonel Grossman Sheepdog on Duty. Savor the flavors that will ignite your senses and strengthen the camaraderie within your ranks. You deserve it, because the streets may be tough, but your coffee shouldn't be. So you can pick them both up at policecoffee.com. That's One Ranger and Lieutenant Colonel Grossman, Sheepdog on Duty. Now let's talk about something else. Mac belts. You know that they're hand-cut veg tan, full-grain saddle leather, and they're dyed to a classic saddle tan. They're contoured with black UV-resistant parallel border stitch, and they're handmade right here, just like Hoot said, in the USA by veterans. And they're perfect for everyday wear or any over-the-waistband or inside-the-waistband everyday carry. They're the finest quality American craftsmanship, and they positively impact military charities. Let's talk one more thing about the buckle. It consists of 100+ grams of unbreakable American stainless steel. It's engineering, designed, assembled, and machined in the USA by USA-built machines. It's backed by a multi-generation warranty, and it's expertly engineered to combine modern precision for rugged use. The Mac buckle and brushed steel D-ring can be added to any Mac belt for a discounted price, or they can be purchased separately. So don't forget to go to macbelts.com. There's plenty of varieties. There's plenty of things to pick from. It's a new year. It's time for a new belt. Make sure you go check them out. PoliceCoffee.com. DJ K10 will get you 10% off your order, and macbelts.com. Guys, that's going to be it for this week. Hoot, I am so happy, like I said, that you came here and told your story, and I hope to connect in the future for more of these conversations. Guys, that's it. That's Hoot. I'm DJ. Catch us on the next one. We'll see you later. We're out of here.
Thanks, brother.